the goddamn line say, Tony?
Please do not use gendered language.
Then what? I'll be arrested, put in airport jail?
Well, you're going completely sideways, man.
It's a big club, and you ain't in it.
How dare you?
Mr. Speaker, the President of the United States.
I'm Chris Hansen with Dave on NBC.
Jack Marius Tactheratrix.
Hi, I'm Spartacus.
Jackson, Sacramento, he, him.
Steven Seagal.
Sex offender guy.
I'm Keith Morris.
This is Muammar Gaddafi.
I'm Rick James, bitch.
Sorting through the lies.
The hijacker's passport was found blocks from the World Trade Center crash site, if you can believe that.
We cannot track $2.3 trillion in transactions.
And uncovering the centuries-long plan for world domination.
Learning about Cuba, having some food.
Let's talk about Chinese people.
Have you ever been in a Turkish prison? Swangles and Fort Lauderdale?
I have sent 6 of my Libyan missiles to blow up the Sears hardware department.
Nothing could be more fun than jumping off a cliff with 2 German bisexuals.
Oh, you English are so superior, aren't you?
Thank you, comrade.
And now, macroaggressions.
That's what assholes call it.
With your host,
Buddy, I don't know who you are, but you're about to get chlamydia.
Charlie Robinson.
Hey, Whitey, where's your hat?
You want to drop the blame on Charlie and say it's all Charlie's fault.
He was a retard.
I get some goddamn diuretic.
Welcome to Macroaggressions. I'm your host, Charlie Robinson. Thanks for checking us out. If you're watching us on Iconic or you're listening to us wherever podcasts are served, we certainly do appreciate it. There's a lot of options out there, and the fact that you chose to check out this program means a lot to us, so thank you very much. You can connect with the show from our website, theoctopusofglobalcontrol.com, and if you have questions for me, you can reach me that way. We are brought to you by 2 sponsors. First is Scribd. If you are into reading ebooks or listening to audiobooks or reading e-magazines, you've got to check out Scribd. It's $9.99 a month. You can sign up for the first month free, cancel anytime you like. The best books and audiobooks are waiting for you on Scribd. If you are interested in a variety of topics, they've got them there. You can cancel anytime. Please check it out. And support for Scribd through our link in the description helps to support the show as well. And we are also sponsored by CuriosityStream. I think that most people that are watching this are into documentaries. Obviously, the host or the guest for this episode knows quite a bit about documentaries. You can check out CuriosityStream. They have thousands of high-definition quality documentaries available for you. Unlimited streaming of thousands of shows. You can stream it on your laptop, your television, your phone, or tablet. It is $2.99 a month. Give me a break. That's so cheap. It's 10 cents a day. You cannot put a price on education, and you can find whatever you're looking for there. If you're into JFK, if you're into the moon landing, if you're into all kinds of crazy stuff, CuriosityStream has it, and we certainly do appreciate you supporting them. Well, about a month ago, I got an email from a gentleman that I was very familiar with, but I didn't know that he knew who I was, and I'm really glad he reached out. Because he made a documentary that, it's no exaggeration to say, it is a life-changing documentary. When you watch this for the first time, it will blow your mind. You'll have to get up away from your computer or your TV, and you're going to have to go take a walk around the block and just let your brain settle, because it will be very disorienting. Because the things that he talks about, the stories behind the headlines, just make a whole lot of sense. And it's very uncomfortable for people that are just getting into this. The documentary is called JFK to 9/11. Everything is a Rich Man's Trick. I watched it a couple of years ago. I saw it maybe a year and a half ago again. And then once I got this email, I had to watch it again, and I am talking about Francis Richard Conolly, the director and producer and writer and everything of this great documentary. Thank you so much for being on this show. I'm ready to geek out with you for about an hour about this documentary that you made. Are you a filmmaker by trade? Is this, or did you do the thing that I did, which was feel compelled to write a book and just figure it out as you went along? How did this even start?
Oh, gee. Well, Charlie, I'll have to start by apologizing to any of those people who've heard me get into this before. But something I think that both you and I, as writers, need to be aware of tonight is that we're now living in a post-Prince Andrew train wreck world. And things have changed so dramatically over the last, since that interview. I mean, the world is a different place now. It truly is. And there's an awful lot of people, definitely, who will be new to this, what you and I are going to talk about. When I was first starting to be interviewed by people like Richie Allen, the movie was, had just kind of exploded, I would have to say. I mean, the reaction was so huge. It had only just, started, and the feelings that you've just talked about that people had, no one, it seemed, just knew where the hell they were with my movie at first. And that disorientation feeling, it seemed to be coming right through the fabric of YouTube at that time. And I was a bit off balance because of, like I say, the huge reaction. But of course now, time's moved on a bit. And now I think we've got an awful lot of people, there's a huge amount of new interest. The interest in me and in the film hasn't died down one iota since I made it, and it's actually increased massively recently. I can tell from all the correspondence I've had, and from the reactions that people give me in the street. So to those, anybody who's heard me go into this before, I'm sorry, but both Charlie and I we're going to have to wipe the slate clean and start afresh. So how did I get into it? As I said to Richie Allen, Charlie, it really began with the assassination itself. My parents, I remember them crying. I remember the whole district where we lived being in a shock. I don't think anybody living now could imagine what it was like. A whole community shaking, and I was watching. Just the other night, Dick Cavett. There's a lot of Dick Cavett's shows from the 60s and 70s that someone, I'm very glad to say, has put on YouTube. And he did a broadcast on the night that Bobby Kennedy was killed. And he's got several actors and various experts there as his guests. And you can feel... And the faces, the sadness, the shock, the horror. It's like, my God, we lost JFK, and now we've lost Bobby. It's just absolutely terrible. And that was the feeling that was the atmosphere that was pervading in everything, And what made a big difference and really had a huge impact on me at the time was that I, as a child, I'm trying to understand what's going on. And my mother and father, in the wake of it, were saying to me, he's been killed because he would have given the ordinary people a chance. And that's why they've killed him. Well, to a child, I'm like, well, who's this they? And where are they? And why would they want to do such a despicable thing and orphan his children and all the rest of it? And like I say, it grew from there. It was something that never went away. And when I was at school, when I was in sort of adolescence, that was when we started to, go into history with any kind of detail. And I was always into history. Nobody ever had to ask me to study, the Romans, partly because I'm from a place called Wallsend, which is where the Roman wall ends. It's the Northumbrian border, and not far from where I lived, there was actually a group of stones that said this is it. This is where the Hadrian's Wall, the Emperor Hadrian Wall, began. And so I was always into history at school, and actually I always found I knew a lot more about history than my teachers did, actually. And when we started to study modern history, the Kennedy assassination was one of the first things that we had to look at. I remember this book. What was it? I think it was Gombrich. E.H. Gombrich. I think it was something like the history of the 20th century. I hope I've got that right. You don't like fan letters where somebody says, "Oh, it's the title." But I think it was E.H. Gombrich. But it was when we got to the section on Kennedy. I remember this sentence that was saying, "Oh, November 22nd, 1963, Dallas. Here's all the details," and Lee Harvey Oswald definitely shot President Kennedy, and no one could ever doubt that there was any other interpretation of it. So here's me at 14 years of age, and I'm like, what? Are you kidding me? What the hell is this? And, it goes on to say various people, part of my mind, do I remember Mark Lane's name? Maybe I've got that confused, but I'm sure somebody else was mentioned there. But there was another paragraph that said some people have tried to cast doubt on the official version. I do remember something about the Warren Commission, but it just seems so obvious to me right there that this book was trying to sell you an idea that was false.
Right.
And being a young artist, and I always knew that's what I was going to be. I always knew I was going to be a writer. It's funny, talking about George Orwell and our shared love of him. I was looking today at that, thing that he did, the essay "Why I Write," and I hadn't looked at that for a while, and he was saying that from the age of like 6, he always knew he was going to be a writer. I always knew from the age of about 12. So I knew that I was going to write about the Kennedy assassination someday, and between then and later adulthood, I always looked in, tried to find. I bought every magazine that had a new article about Kennedy. I also got anything that was about Marilyn Monroe or Bobby or Martin Luther King or anything about that. And the thing that I always remember about all of the magazines and books was that I always felt that the people who'd written them were stumbling in the dark. That was the thing that always hit me very hard. They wanted to know, and they had fragments here and fragments there, but I always felt, that really that there was this huge thing that all of them didn't know, and I'm still wondering, what it was. So then we went through that phase where the 25th anniversary came and went of the assassination, and that was when The Men Who Killed Kennedy, the series, came out. And that frustrated everyone who'd ever cared about it, and it frustrated the hell out of me. And right from the very beginning, I was thinking, I don't like this. What is all of this? And I kept wondering why it was that they weren't having an interview with the man who was alleged to have made it, Nigel Turner, the British director. I mean, I don't know to this day if he even exists. Is he real? But I just don't know. I've never seen an interview with him, and I found that very, very suspicious. So that was all we had. Anybody who cared about Kennedy, it was The Men Who Killed Kennedy became, like the Rosetta Stone. This was the thing that you were supposed to believe in. And even though there was I could see there was useful information in it because there was a hell of a lot of interviews with people who were there when it happened. And there was a lot of interviews with some terrific people like Josiah Thompson, who I think was one of the best investigators, who actually investigated it for Life magazine. So there was good, there was obviously useful information there, but we were still nowhere near the truth. And the thing that most struck me at the time in the Josiah Thompson interview, and this really, I remember this garnered my interest and made me feel like I'm going to fight for the truth to come out somehow someday. I do remember that when Josiah Thompson said this, because he said that if you talk to any criminal investigator who is good, he said, and he's been looking at the murder cases, for a long time. He said they'll all tell you that the same thing always happens. So the way that it goes is that things simplify. He actually did this with his hands. I remember that very clearly. He said that if you've got a situation where a man's been found dead, and was it his wife? Was it the butler? Was it his business partner? Was it da-da-da-da-da-da? He said that as you go along, you eliminate this possibility. You eliminate that possibility. You realize that eyewitness is lying because it just couldn't be, it doesn't tie up. This happens. Things get simpler. Things come together. And it boils down to, either his brother did it or it was his wife or something like that. But Josiah Thompson said that's not been the case with the Kennedy assassination at all. He said that things not only have not got simpler, he said that they seem to have become more complex as time has gone on. So I realized at that point, somebody must be creating this complexity. So who and why, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So now I've got all these questions in my head as I go into later adulthood. And then this information age that you and I are now part of, and here's me on a laptop, etc. You too. When I got broadband, one of the first things I started researching and started looking at, because I'd been so curious for so long, because the Watergate business had never, the real truth about that had never come out. Who was really involved? Why did they do it? All this kind of thing. So I remembered the names of people like, that Kleindienst and Ehrlichman and and Donald Zagretti. Who was he? There's so much you can find out about these people now through the internet. So I remember clicking on that, and one of the first things that came up with it, am I straight here, was the E. Howard Hunt deathbed confession video.
Right. And
when I saw that, I thought, well, what the hell? Here's this nut saying he admits the CIA did it, and it's not on TV, it's not being talked about. What in the hell is going on? So I thought straight away, no, is this bogus? Is this, a rich man's trick? Which, of course, it was. It was just done to try and mislead people again into thinking that, Lyndon Baines Johnson was most responsible. And then when I started looking into it, there was loads of stuff on the internet, that tried, through his lawyer and various other witnesses that were trying to say, that Lyndon Baines Johnson was the criminal mastermind behind it, which, of course, he wasn't. So that, bit by bit was what led me to a situation where I still absolutely had the motivation, but at last I had the means to start researching it properly, and that was when it all. And the thing that made it start to really all gel was that what was his name? Duncan Campbell, I think it was, the Guardian journalist. I remember his name because he was involved in this scandal where the police broke into his house while he was injured after falling off his bicycle, and it was a big news story. His nose was in a terrible state, and while he was in hospital, I think it was Duncan Campbell, they broke into his flat. And he became a very well-known journalist. And he was one of the first who got hooked into this thing with, Papa Bush and Prescott Bush being involved with the Nazis. And then this very brave American journalist, I think his name was Buchanan, because he was threatened. He did a lot of work on it as well. And then it all started to come out through this wonderful historian called Webster Tarpley, who I'm sure you must have come across. And the information started to build at the same time as I realized I was getting very close to what really happened with Kennedy on the day. And I realized that because of that research, that, I mean, it's not right to say that previous researchers had made the mistake of concentrating too much on what happened on the day, because they had limited resources then. But I realized that I'd got, this huge amount of information about this Nazi past of the American ruling class. Mm-hmm. And that obviously was all intertwined with the mafia, which was all intertwined with what led up to the Kennedy assassination. Years ago, on the Beatles anthology, I think it was, Ringo Starr made an intelligent observation, I thought, where he said that the wind down to a divorce never happens just like that. Life's not like that. A man and woman get married, they're happy, and then little by little, things go wrong until finally, the moment comes. And it was obvious to me that it couldn't have been the case that, that a couple of nuts decided, one day just to kill Kennedy. But then the question, Charlie, was how far back do you have to go for a starting point? And it was that train of thought, all this information that I suddenly had about the American Nazis and Prescott Bush and one thing and another, and all the information that I was getting that was piecing together about what really happened with Kennedy. And I suddenly realized, I thought, Jesus, I've got this thing in my head that's bursting my head. Mm-hmm. There was so much. And I thought, well, I've got to get this down. And then I suddenly thought, this is it. I've got to make a film out of this. So I hope that wasn't too long an answer. And I'm glad you did make a film out of it. And I think people might assume that when you talk about how far back do I have to go to get to the bottom of this story, they might assume that you're thinking, go back 10 years. You went back to World War I and started from there, and explain how that had ramifications. And then we get into World War II, and you start to see how the Prescott Bush and the Bush family and Brown Brothers Harriman was involved in the financing of this, and how Henry Ford was involved in it. And all of a sudden, it starts to paint a picture of America as not necessarily being this group of patriots that are fighting against the Nazis, but you start to find that they are at best enablers of the Nazis, and at worst, partners with them in some of this. And I think that is alarming. And I would say, you talk about how the Nazi Party went on to become a prominent part of America. I would argue that the Nazi Party also went on to become a part of the British monarchy as well. Oh, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. And so how does the financing of World War II, which seems to be disconnected from, on the surface, seems to be disconnected from the assassination of John F. Kennedy. How did that play a role in grouping together these American psychopaths that are best described as Nazis, and how they took that mentality from Germany and grew it in the United States, and it culminated in 1963 with the shooting of JFK. And I would think that most people, I know a lot of people say, well, things changed from that point on. I don't know if people realize exactly how much they changed from that point on, because it seems that was the point in time in which the American Nazis assumed full control of the United States. Is that... Maybe you can elaborate on that, or talk about how World War II was, grew this group.
Well, I think the best place to start with an answer for that, because it's a huge question, Charlie. But I think the best place to start with an answer is with the statement that Napoleon made that money has no motherland. I think that's the best way to start with that. The thing is that capitalist business and global corporations was all very new, and no businessman wants to do anything other than make huge profits. And you had a situation where, as I've said in the movie, all of these international businessmen who were appearing for the first time, what they were wanting to do, the most importantly of all, was to create the bulwark that the film has mentioned, to hold back what they perceived to be the great menace to their fortunes, which was the communist Russia, revolutionary Russia. And so that's why you had a situation where it was, particularly at first, it was the chemicals industry with the Nazis. They were making all the things that Germany couldn't do on its own, like rubber and various other plastics, for with this thing between the Rockefellers and A.G. Farben. And that was how it really began to grow. But the most interesting thing is, when did this crystallize as an idea? That's the thing that I suppose we'll never know. I mean, everything begins with an idea in a man's mind. Everything does, and we'll probably never know exactly who first had the thought to say, right, we buy Germany pretty much because Germany is financially a ruin after the First World War. And once we've bought them, yes, we make profits, but could we then create a completely phony Second World War and use it to hold back this Russian menace? Somebody had that idea. They then put it to the oligarchs, the Rockefellers, to the Rothschilds, and one thing or another, and then they hire a puppet and say to themselves, well, okay, how are we going to fool the world, with this puppet? Again, you're talking about, as I was talking about Dick Cavett, he did an interview with Orson Welles. Very interesting interview. What an interesting man Orson Welles was. So worldly wise and literate. And he's Dick Cavett says to him, I've been reading about you, Orson. I can't believe you actually met Hitler in your youth. And could you tell us about that? I didn't know this. And he said, oh yeah. And he said he was trekking around Austria with this school teacher who was one of those nerdy types who has the knapsack. Mm-hmm. And he said that as he was trekking around the Austrian Tyrol with him, it came out that this man was a budding Nazi. And he makes the point, Orson Welles, that he was a budding Nazi at a time when, and can I get the quote right? He said that at the time, and this is sort of like, 28, 29, 30, that at the time everybody thought of the Nazis as just a fringe bunch of cranks and loonies who weren't taken seriously at all then. Mm-hmm. And he, was being hauled around the Austrian Tyrol by this man. And he said they had some sort of Nazi rally. And he says to Orson Welles, would you like to meet the great men who were, in charge of this new movement? And at that time, there were others who were supposed to be the leading lights of the Nazi movement. And Orson Welles said he remembers sitting down at this sort of, picnic meal at this rally, and he said the man sitting next to him was Hitler. And there were others who were having and he spoke German. So, he said, everybody's having a good gaggle and one thing and another. And the thing he says that strikes him to this day is that he remembers almost nothing about Hitler, because he said he had no personality at all. And Dick Cavett was really sort of thrown by that. And he said, well, yeah, but if you add sort of a bit of Sieg Heiling and 50 million people, and he said, well, yeah, but that's the whole point. On his own, Hitler was an absolute nobody. He was a nothing. He made no impression whatsoever. So, I think that's very important, that they realized that this was somebody who they could absolutely use as a puppet. And that one little anecdote makes me think to this day that the right way to think about Hitler is more than anything else an actor. In the Ronald Reagan mold. That's how the whole thing grew up. That's how the whole thing started.
Is it fair to say that the Nazis won the war?
You're inviting me to sort of quote from my own words in my own film, but well, that's the point, Charlie. You've seen the movie. The point I make in the movie is that it was the Nazis who won the war, really, because the Nazis played on both sides. How can you possibly have a situation where Henry Ford is making all of the German trucks? He's making German tanks. AT&T are making aeroplanes that are, bombing. The gas used in the Holocaust is being, made by A.G. Farben, who are in bed with American industrialists. I mean, it was all summed up by that, very powerful bit of that wonderful actor Maximilian Schmel, Maximilian Schnell, in my movie, where he's pointing at the camera and saying, the Russians signed pacts with him, and American industrialists made huge money from Hitler, or as he says, or from the Nazis. They were all in bed together. This was the lesson that JFK, told all of his girlfriends, particularly the Judith Campbell Exner in the film, is that the public just don't know. They just don't realize that if you've got, a mafia don over here and a Hitler over here and a Stalin over here and a big British landowner over there, that it doesn't matter what business they're in, or which political party they lead, or which country they're supposed to be the head of. It just doesn't matter. The elite are the elite, and they're all in bed together. And, the truth is that whole war, as I've said, with that clip from the David Attenborough film earlier, that whole war was phony. My uncles and my dad tried to, I don't want to say explain this to me, but they told me many times that everyone who was around at that time, they all were uncomfortable with the Second World War. And this is why when I was interviewed by Justin Stellman, I asked everybody to look at the movie with Robert Mitchum and Kurt Jürgens called The Enemy Below. I don't know if you've taken the trouble to see that, either that interview or the movie, but there's a marvelous moment in it where Kurt Jürgens, who's a wonderful old German actor, he sits his second in command down. I'm losing my voice already. He sits down his second in command and starts to talk to him and says, I don't like this war. I'm sick of this war. There's something wrong with this war. The words he uses are, its purpose is dark and its reason is twisted. There's something not right here. And I wanted people to to see that, because that's the kind of thing that my uncles and my dad, all of whom were involved, in the war in various ways, especially my Uncle Edward, because he was a merchant seaman. He got strafed by, Stukas and everything. They all said there's something fishy going on here. But you know, it was supposed to be your patriotic duty, you know, to fight in that war. So you weren't supposed to say anything against anything. But it does make me wonder to this day. Had you and I been there with a lot of friends, and we'd had some way of, I don't know, we'd have had to have handed out leaflets at the time. But if we could have handed out leaflets to all of the soldiers and all of everybody to say, you know, Henry Ford is building the German trucks, you know, and the Panzer tanks that are crushing your husband and your brother and your boyfriend, you know, he's making those as well.
Yeah.
What difference would it have made, Charlie? We'll never know. You know, people are, you know, it's often said that people are so stupid and so sheep-like that they just would have gone on and on killing each other. But it does make you wonder if. You know, but the thing is, it reminds me of that line from that lovely song by Janis Ian. You know, that the world was so much younger than today. People were so innocent and so naive in those days. And the fact is that, you know, industrialization was brand new. It had only just started. And people just don't realize that, you know, they just don't realize the nature of the ruling class and the fact that the ruling class in every age take whatever is going on and use it to hurt the public.
Yeah. Yeah, it reminds me of the Goebbels quote where he said, "It's easy to bring people into war. Just denounce the pacifists for their lack of patriotism."
That was Goering.
Or that was Goring. Yeah. Denounce them for their lack of patriotism and for exposing the rest of us to potential harm. And then, you know, the point is...
I'm very glad that you put that in your book.
Yeah.
Because that's one of the most important quotes for everyone to read, because that's such a classic example of, like I say, the ruling class people knowing how to manipulate the population, knowing the population themselves, knowing what, you know, they respond to, knowing how to control them through nationalism, knowing how to control them through patriotism. It's a very, very important statement. Hermann Goering made a lot of important statements, particularly the admission that he started the Reichstag fire.
Well, I put quotes in the book. I think I put 8 different quotes from Adolf Hitler. I put a lot of them from Hermann Goering and from Goebbels and the guys like that. Not because I'm a fan of the Nazi party or anything like that, but because these guys knew the plan and these guys knew the formula for how to start a war. And if you listen to their words, take out the fact that they were psychopathic, but just listen to how they describe it. It's very methodical and very almost like there's an instruction manual for creating a war and for using the media to bring the public into it. It's and the reason why I put so many of their quotes in the books is because if you just removed that Hermann Goering was talking about it or Adolf Hitler and slapped somebody else's name on it, it would fit with our society today. The lessons that they're talking about, the strategies are transferable to today. In fact, they're still used against us.
Well said indeed.
Yeah. So so talk about you've got Prescott Bushes and guys like that. They're the first globalists, right? They're starting this concept of globalization. The Rockefellers go on to be.
They were.
Yeah, they talk about themselves as being internationalists, whatever title you want to put on that. It seemed that once we got out of World War II, we started to move into the Cold War. You've got McCarthyism, you've got get under your desks because in case an inbound missile is coming, all of that nonsense. And we get a quote that seems to fly under the radar from Eisenhower talking about about how we should be very wary of the military-industrial complex and their undue influence that they have. Yeah. We start to see how it used to be that bombs were made to fight wars, and then it seemed like something changed, and now wars were being manufactured in order to sell bombs. And it seemed like the people that are profiting from this, bankers, industrialists, and media companies and things like that, all Rockefeller, Rothschild, Bush, everybody's got their hands in it. They all stand to benefit financially from additional wars. And it looked like Kennedy was trying to do away with that, or trying to de-escalate these situations. Cuban Missile Crisis comes to mind, anything having to do with Russia. And that was bad for business for these guys. Yeah. And so I'm wondering, at what point did they decide that this is a guy, meaning Kennedy, that we can't work with and he needs to be eliminated? Any idea when that sort of came? Like you said, it all starts with an idea, and it's hard to know when that idea.
Well, Madeleine Duncan Brown, in the interview that she gave, I use a moment of her in my film. She said that before Kennedy was elected, they'd already decided to kill him.
Wow.
Oh yeah. I mean, it wasn't by any sense. It's like the end of 1962, or we're into 1963, and we don't like the way that this guy is going. But before he was even elected, they wanted him out of the way for everything that he stood for. So yeah, I mean. This is why I want people to realize that, the rich have got an awful lot of time on their hands because they're a leisure class. And in order to survive, as they go along, they think, they have to keep trying to make sure that the underclasses, as they see them, never have the faintest opportunity, never have a chance of taking their money away, and most of all, taking away their control of the world, because that's what they rely on for a living. It's funny, Johnny, sometimes people forget that, Prince Charles doesn't have a profession. Prince Andrew doesn't have a profession. He's not a teacher. If he stops being a prince, he can't go and be a plasterer or a bricklayer. Right. Or a writer like me and you. They can't do anything. Their whole life is power. That's what they're experts in. Power. Being those who sit right at the top and make the rules for everybody else to live by. And in making the rules, they decide how much tax everybody pays, and then they steal it through various means. And the best one is the military-industrial complex. It's all about contracts. It's funny you actually that you've raised this so early on, because I had an interesting experience recently where a friend who I'd not seen for a while, he sort of called me up. He said, have you seen War Dogs, the movie? And what? Never heard of it? I said to him, you know me. Don't go around watching Hollywood movies. They're garbage these days. They weren't always, let me specify that.
Right.
I don't want anybody to think that I'm in any sense anti-American or anti-Hollywood. In the days when Hollywood, was producing Spartacus or One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, I was the biggest fan. I love. Those movies were a huge influence upon me in the days, as I say, when they had great artists making them. But it's not the case anymore, So, there's Ricky Gervais, who I'll come back to later. As he says, no one's going to the cinema these days because, it's all just a clone of Batman or Spider-Man. It's all been seen a billion times before. So I said to my friend, War Dogs, never heard of it. When did that come out then? And he said, it's just a couple of years. And I said, well, what's the problem? He said, I was watching the beginning and watching the movie, and it was like you wrote it. what? What are you talking about? And he said, well, the beginning. He said, I thought that you wrote the beginning. So, okay, so I thought, well, I'd better check this out. What's he talking about? So I got on this computer, found a copy somewhere, probably a pirated one, and I realized what he was on about. And I would like your viewers to check out, even if they're not into this kind of thing, if they're not into movies or whatever. The beginning of War Dogs is very, very interesting, and I can see why he thinks that I could have written it, and certainly you could have written it, because it says at the start of War Dogs, I mean, it could have been written by Smedley Butler. That's the thing that got me, John. Because there they are saying, when the public look at the TV screen and they see something from Afghanistan or Iran or whatever, Desert Storm, all that rubbish. What they see is it's supposed to all be wrapped in a patriotic flag, and here's the local boy from Arkansas doing his duty, and there's some crap about the other guy not liking our freedoms or something like that. That's how they sell it.
Right.
He said that if you talk to an arms dealer, which I can pronounce it right. I think it was Ephraim Diveroli, this Jewish boy and his friend who became arms dealers. That's what the movie's about. Mm-hmm. He said that what they see is just, it's a market opportunity. What they see is the helmet that costs $50, the gun that costs $200, the pack that costs another $500, the radio that they just see a business opportunity. It's amazing, and what got me most about War Dogs as a film, I'm afraid I don't want to spoil the plot and spoil any viewing of it for anybody who's interested. By telling you what happens, but the important thing, if any of your viewers do go and watch that now, because I've asked them to, what I hope they'll come away with is this thought, because if there's a sort of a moral to the tale, or if you want to take a message from War Dogs, that message would be, I hope, that this shows you how lubricated dirty men are by the rich. Mm. When these two boys who'd become arms dealers at the age of whatever it was, 22, what was it, 21, they were so young, and they were both crackheads as well. That was the thing that got me.
It was crazy.
Yeah, out of their brains on coke. And they become, drug dealers. And what did they find? That when they were shipping arms to the Middle East, the government was holding their hand all the way. And once it was done, they were flying them home on a C-130 transport. And, you get lifted under your bum and you get patted on the head, and everything is lubricated and made easy for you if you are a man who is bringing mayhem and sorrow and death and destruction and torment and privation, anything that hurts the public. If that's what you do as a business, if you can hurt the people, the poor people in the third world, and just keep their misery going, then the system loves you. And it's always been like that.
And celebrates you too. In the case of Adnan Khashoggi, he became a very well-known guy. Jeffrey Epstein, same thing. These guys were protected. They were facilitated. They were even raised up and given, sort of PR makeovers. It's insane. And what were they doing? Just what you said. Bringing mayhem and destruction in a variety of forms and following these well-worn trade routes that were set up years ago, whether you're moving drugs or guns or kids or whatever. It seems that they've got those trade routes mapped out, and you just slide in and add your product to the mix, and as long as you're taking care of them, they watch out for you.
Yeah, and the thing is that, like I say, I hope if that's the only thing that people take from this, then, I'll be glad, because what people need to understand is that it doesn't have to be this way. I've said on other shows, and I'll elaborate on it if you want. Having said that, it'll probably get this video banned if I do.
I like it already.
Well, I've said it. The very first time I was on Australian radio with Rodrigo Soto, I tried to talk about this then, and I then tried to bring it up again because that video was banned. When I was interviewed by Andy Young on Raconteurs News.
Well, we're on David Icke's platform, so it won't get banned. If it's the truth,
well, in that case, Charlie, I'll talk about this, and we'll see what's happened. We'll see what happens, because on both occasions, the video, the next day, the producer told me, okay, it's been uploaded, and I looked for it, and there was just a black flag. This has been taken down because it outrages, YouTube's terms of whatever, And I thought, well, at least I know I said the right thing.
Yeah. You're
so as it's the first time, I think, is it? Yeah, I didn't say any of this on the Jason Goodman show. No, I didn't. So I'll try it as people can see me for once. The thing is that, as I tried to explain to Rodrigo, what the rich are covering up on a daily basis, this is their métier, this is their life, is that we could, in this age, all be millionaires right now, no problem whatsoever. Because we've now got the productive capacity to give everyone a millionaire lifestyle. Now, I know some people will say, well, do you really apply that to the third world? Maybe not the third world right now, but there is certainly enough productive capacity. We are so amazing now in this, world where they say everything's hand-built by robots, with hardly any labor costs whatsoever. We're so good at producing cars and televisions and motorbikes, microwaves, laptops, clothing. So much of it now is so easy to produce. There's just no reason anymore for anyone to be a drudge, for anybody to live in fear, for anybody to, worry constantly about bills and mortgages. And we've reached a stage in human development where that is not necessary anymore. It's only kept going by the rich so that they can maintain their privileged position. And it's that part of it that the public don't get. That's the part of it that they don't understand. When I've tried to explain, you see, when I first started trying to get it across to people that 9/11 was a hoax, they all came back and said, yeah, but why would they do it? Because they can't make the connection, Charlie, you see, that a writer and an intellectual like you can, between causing fear, causing mayhem, and that maintaining the people in the ivory towers. Yeah. That's the connection that people don't make. When I've said to people that, an awful lot of it, what they do is done, stimulating phony wars just so they can sell weapons to both sides. People get that. They do get that because it's money, you see. Yeah, makes sense. You start a war, between Iran and Iraq or Saudi Arabia and somebody else. And then as a British businessman, you move in there and you say, well, would you like this missile? And would you like a Hawker Harrier? And would you like an aircraft carrier? And then, an American like Ephraim Diveroli comes along and says, well, hey, I've got all these M16s and all these bullets. People get that part of it. Yes, they do. But it's the hierarchy part, what I call Orwell's, destroyed dreams and his discredited paradise I don't want to say theory, but this is what he talks about in 1984. So I tried when I was with Rodrigo and with Andy as well to say to people, what you've got to try to do is to imagine that if you were going, say, to the races one day, and I use this analogy because I live not too far away from the race course. And when you go to the race course, to me, it's always I don't want to say shocking. It's such an ironic, view that you get of British society, because right there in front of you, you can see the strata that we have. You see the class system right in front of you. I have seen the Queen at York races, way up in the gods, right on the top floor. And there she is with champagne on ice, and caviar, etc. And, the robber barons who are her friends, and, the princes. And up there with her, there will only be multi-billionaires and trillionaires. There won't be anybody else on that floor. Not on that floor. And then in between, you've got your middle class. They'll be having champagne, but they'll be having prawn salad sandwiches and roast beef, They're occupying the middle floors. And then below that, you've got your working man there with his hot dog and his hamburger and a beer, usually a warm beer, if it's an English racecourse. And there it is, you see. It's right there in front of you. Now, if we were all now enjoying the fruits of the machine age that we should be enjoying, that are possible, if we were all now living at a level where basically we had a millionaire lifestyle, a good house, and a couple of BMWs, and 3 or 4 nice holidays a year. I mean, that's all $1 million or £1 million buys you these days. It's not that great. It doesn't buy a stately home in these days. But we could all have our own detached house and, like I say, a good car and a lots of holidays kind of lifestyle. Right now, everybody could have that. But if we were all millionaires, you would get a situation where those people would be going to the races. And when it started to rain, they would say, well, come on, we want to get inside and be comfortable with everybody else. You're going to have somebody saying, well, you can't go in there. Have you any idea how much it costs to go in there? It's $5,000 per plate, or it's $10,000 for each chair at the table. Well, if you've got it, if you've got 10 million in the bank, you're going to say, well, no problem. Get me in there. I'll have the prawns and the champagne. And if you then say, well, the middle class part is full, and somebody says, well, I want to go up to the top, and they say, well, that's $100,000 a chair. No problem. There's your $100,000. They will then say, well, the Queen is in there, and she came in a helicopter. Well, if you've got 10 million in the bank, you're going to say, well, I came in a helicopter. What's a helicopter? You see, if everybody's got that kind of money, that kind of lifestyle, it immediately becomes a threat to the power and the prestige and the position of the elite. They're going to find themselves being elbowed out of the way while they try to watch the races by bricklayers.
Mm-hmm.
That's not going to happen, John. You cannot have. You see, that's the destruction of the hierarchical society, and it was this that Orwell was trying to get across in 1984. And I realized when I first read that book, even at the age of 15, 16, that, the working man, the average punter, he just doesn't get this. You say to the average punter, oh, you need to, really carefully read, because it's only a little thing. It's not too many pages. But the book within the book of 1984 is called The Theory and Practice of Oligarchical Collectivism. Now, what the hell does that mean? To a man who drives a bus, or drives a train, or a nurse who nurses in the hospitals. The theory and practice of Hollywood, forget it, go away. It's just too difficult for them, and that's just why I realized that this was the thing that I needed to use my life to try to explain to people, that this is what it all comes down to. It's just as Orwell says in that book within the book, that thinking men like you and I, from the very beginning of the industrial age, they realized that if the machine age, if industrialization, robots and everything else, if that was used to raise the general standard of living, then, in no time at all, we could all live in a world where we all had a leisure existence. But that would mean the end of ruling class privilege. At the moment, the Queen can walk straight into the best seat at Wimbledon. You can't stop her. No one can stop her. She can walk straight into the best seat at Lord's Cricket Ground. Walk into she wants to fly first class. She just takes the best seat. That's what the people at the very top do. They never have their time wasted. They never have to wait in a queue. That was why I tried so hard to get this across, in the film. This is why we're all being had, and why the ruling class think this has to go on and on and on forever. That we have to be deceived forever, because it's by keeping us down, and basically by making people live at a subsistence level forever, that they can maintain this privilege at the top. See, I want people always, whenever I do this kind of thing, to ask themselves simple questions about their own life. The most important being, why can we never get ahead? Because nobody can ever get ahead. It's like, you work hard here, you do extra hours, you do extra shifts, you do this, you do that. You always seem to come out in the same state. You know what I mean? And that's not an accident. That is being arranged from the very, very top. The very top. It's being arranged by the child abusers like Prince Andrew to keep you and I and everybody else down forever. And this is why, this is how this ties up with Ephraim de Veroli and his friend. That if you promote wars and phony wars and conflict throughout the world, people will always be in a situation where they face privation, where they face starvation, where all they're trying to do during most of every day is they're thinking about their next meal. They're not thinking about hierarchy. That's a arbitrary concept. They're thinking about, my crops and how am I going to get my next load of apples to come down while somebody's shooting at me. That's what the the public are thinking about. So this is, the general rich man's trick that I want people to think about, because until the day that everyone realizes that this is the true nature of the world, we won't be able to organize to get rid of it and have true democracy.
Yeah, and it seems that the co-conspirators that allowed this to happen or facilitate this to make this happen for the elite at the very top or the media. The media plays a vital role in this, in telling everybody that this is the way it is, this is normal, or here's the new war that we need to get behind. I've been very critical. In my book, I wrote about 8 tentacles of control, and I think everybody assumes that the military component of that is the most dangerous because obviously it deals with war and bombs and missiles and bullets and things like that. Of course, it directly ties to death. But I've argued that the banking and media components are far more dangerous than the military because the media can make it appear to be a good idea.
Forgive
we have to go to war.
I knew this would happen. This may have to be edited differently, but this is what I mean, Charlie, about having the worst kind of day when you need to do something important. I'm just going to have to let that ring until it dies.
That's okay. It won't bother us. But we talk about the media played a huge role, as you mentioned, in JFK. how that story was sold to the public. The media played a huge role in 9/11, how that story was sold to the public. And what we find, if after you start to dig into these things, is that the media plays a very different role. They are controlled by people above them. We sort of assume, especially here in the United States, we sort of assume that, the media is objective. They don't really care one way or the other. Yeah, maybe Fox leans more to the Republican side and MSNBC leans more to the Democratic side, but by far and wide, they're just trying to get the news delivered to the people as accurately as they can. That, of course, is a gigantic lie. That is not even close to what they're doing. But the role of the media in 9/11 and JFK and in keeping this power structure in place seems to be critical. That if we were to take down the media's control of everything, perhaps we might be living in a different world.
I couldn't put it better, Joey. I don't think I need to add anything to that. You've put that beautifully. Absolutely, we would. In fact, as you say, really, the media is the most dangerous thing of all. I mean, look at this, coronavirus nonsense that's going on. I mean, at least, I don't know what you're finding there, but nobody is buying it here. Actually, one of the people who write to me on Facebook, this nice man called Damien Mooney, he's in Ireland, I think. I said I would mention something he's just sent me, which is, I don't know if anybody's shown it to you. There's a video of people who work in Iranian hospitals, and they're dancing. Have you seen this?
No, I haven't seen it.
He said that they've been told that there's this terrible outbreak in Iran, and so they've dressed them from head to toe in these see-through diaphanous monkey suits so that they're totally well protected. And when the radio comes on, they're all, they're taking it so seriously, the Iranians, that they're all bopping to music because they know perfectly well that it's just a sham. I would ask anybody who still isn't certain about what fake news is, just answer this simple question. Is there any bodies out there in the street? Can you see any bodies? Are there any bodies out there of dead people? If there's anybody, I'm very, very sorry. Please, I really apologize to your
it's okay.
to your viewers. It's been a mad day for me. If there's anybody who's still, not sure about fake terrorism, have you ever actually seen with your own eyes a Muslim terrorist with a grenade or a gun running along a street and shooting a policeman? Have you ever seen that with your own eyes? Why would you want to believe what the media are telling you? After the Kennedy assassination, after his brother, after John Lennon, after all of them, Jill Dando and everybody, and then we have Jimmy Savile with this paedophile scandal, and now we've got Epstein, and we've got,
you've got
Prince Andrew. Why would you believe a single word that the media said? Why?
Yeah. Yeah, I thought about that with regard to the coronavirus, that the fact that, so the information that we're getting, you could take the coronavirus out of it and just replace it with just about anything. But in this particular case, that information is coming from the Chinese government, the Chinese media, the American government, the American media, and the Centers for Disease Control. 5 organizations that I would say have zero credibility. Yeah. And yet we are acting as if this is something that is a certainty. That this is, of course, the coronavirus is just wiping out and killing everybody. Now, it may turn into something that is a serious thing. I don't know. I'm not a scientist. I'm not an expert on that. But I do know one thing. when they tell you, when the American media tells you to believe something, and they are they just strike me as the boys who cried wolf. They have no credibility. They have a history of lying to us about everything. They lied to us about JFK. They lied to us about 9/11. They lied to us about weapons of mass destruction and taking babies out of incubators. But this time they're telling us the truth. I mean, at some point you have to just kind of say, guys, we're just not falling for this anymore. And maybe I would be wrong, and maybe this coronavirus, let's just say, turns out to be a much bigger deal than we're than I make it out to be. But I have a very good reason for not trusting them. It's the source of the information is a source that has been compromised for a very long time.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Well, the thing is, you see, people may wonder, why have they gone with this corona thing? And the reason for it is that it's a completely inexpensive. I mean, it costs nothing at all to photograph a Chinese person on a bus who's got one of those face masks on. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you see it a lot in your country, but certainly in the UK, you see people from Hong Kong and from China and from Japan, from Asians all the time, because their home cities, particularly places like Hong Kong, are so polluted and so intense with traffic and and carbon dioxide and lots of people. Even at school, they've been told, look, you don't want to be breathing this in, walk around with a mask on for your health's sake. So it's something that you see in the world a great deal. It is those kinds of people wearing masks. So getting out that kind of image, that they need for propaganda to begin with, is very easy. And it's very easy to say it all started, in China. And the reason that they've picked this, and the reason that they've done it now, is that at this time of year, you always have people who've got, a sniffle, a bit of cold, a bit of flu, a bit of this, a bit of that. And that's all corona is. Coronavirus is in the world in the same way as typhus and typhoid and diphtheria, and, everything is in the world. You can't just eradicate these germs. They exist. And what they've tried to do is to say that this COVID-19 strain or whatever is a new deadly strain of coronavirus, and this is the one that could, be a pandemic and sort of wipe out the whole world. That's utter rubbish. Anybody who knows the science knows, excuse me, that, all bugs in the world mutate all of the time. That's why we've got this problem with antibiotic resistance. Mm-hmm. But the fact that they mutate does not mean that you can say with any certainty how each different bug is going to react on each different individual, because we are all individuals. Everybody is unique. You could, excuse me, have a situation where, you could have a door handle or somebody coughing or something over 1,000 people with this COVID-19 thing. And one person out of the 1,000 might get it, have a mild infection, and then that just goes away. It might be 2. It might be 5 with 1,000 different people. Mm-hmm. You then might, if you put 1 million people in one room and infected them all, or tried to, you might get one death from that 1 million, but it wouldn't be any different from somebody getting influenza and dying. It's the thing is that they're making this thing out to be a pandemic threat, and it isn't. It's just another ordinary germ that's in the world. And my own feeling about this is that, I mean, they're already saying that the Chinese are grinding it down to eradicate it and get rid of it, and that to me is a signal that they're already deciding to wrap it up because no one's buying it. So my own prediction at this point, Charlie, I might as well make one. Let's
hear it.
I would say no more than another 2 weeks, and we won't be hearing about it anymore. They'll just quietly drop it and say, oh, being great modern scientists and people who understand everything, and we've got it under control. Oh yeah, it was never there in the first place. And if there's anybody out there watching this, as I say, watching me, watching you, getting into the truth movement, getting into truth for the first time, and all I can say is, if you've swallowed that coronavirus story, then I'm sorry, you're a fool, because it's just fake news.
Yeah, and they love to push viruses. They love to push certain death. They love to push bird flu. I've been to Hong Kong a couple times. You're right. There you see people walking around with masks there on a Sunday afternoon when there's no pandemic going on. It's just part of life in some of these areas. Where can people find you? Where can people find your work? Where can people support you? How can people, I mean, obviously people need to watch the movie and they need to share it because it's so valuable, but how can people get a hold of you or support you in some way?
Well, Johnny, that is actually the most difficult thing of all, and because you haven't told them. And thank you. But the people who were familiar with me and my work and what's been happening with the movie, they all know that the movie was banned. They took down the original version. And the reason that they took it down was because they knew it was changing the world so rapidly. Not long after I'd been on the Richie Allen show, he had someone on, I hope the journalist will forgive me, I've forgotten her name, who said that there was a group of journalists in New York who lived near to the Amnesty International headquarters. And when my film first really started to have an impact, and it first went viral and it started to seep into the public consciousness, this group of journalists said, well, hang on a minute. What if this man is right? Amnesty International has always had this kind of like halo around it because of the sterling work. You could never, for a moment, chastise or hold their feet to the flame. Amnesty International, the candle and the barbed wire. And they said, well, hang on a minute. Just what if he's right? And Richie Allen said that this, woman had got in touch with these journalists, and that what they'd done was go round the corner to the Amnesty headquarters, and in one afternoon discovered that all of the people who work there were ex-CIA agents. And because of that, because of this new consciousness, could it be that everything in our lives, everything, the media, the justice system, the cops, the city, the money traders, absolutely could everything be a rich man's trick? It started to seep into the consciousness and get shared around. And it was that led to that awful story in Haiti where they said that the Oxfam charity workers were actually, the money that people had put in tins to help orphans all around the world, it was actually being used by, Oxfam executives. I mean, you went into this, I think, was it Laura Silsby?
Yes.
I think, this is so important, Charlie. I'd rather shut up now and let you tell the public about Laura Silsby and, what the influence, as I say, the shared public consciousness about everything being a rich man's trick, what it led to in Laura Silsby's case, because you talked about this so superbly well with Sean Atwood. I wish I'd been there to join in. I'd like to know, because I think there's some parts of the Laura Silsby story that maybe I'd like a bit more information about. But please tell me more about the Laura Silsby thing and how you found that out and what the details exactly were.
Yeah, Laura Silsby was working. She's an American. And she was in Haiti, and she was arrested at the border Haiti, so it's the island of Hispaniola. It's pretty much split down the middle with Haiti to the west and Dominican Republic to the east. And she was caught at the Dominican Republic border trying to enter with 33 orphan children from Haiti after the earthquake. She had been down there in some official capacity tied to Clinton Foundation, or maybe it was Clinton Global Initiative. I'm not really sure. But she had ties to them, and she was taking these children out of the country that were orphaned. And they stopped her at the border, and they didn't buy her story completely, and they dug into it a little bit more. And what they determined was, and I'm not exactly sure how they determined this, but they determined that these children were not orphaned, that there were parents that were still alive that were actively looking for them, and they arrested her. They put her in jail in Haiti and for trafficking these children. And she stayed there for about 6 months. And it became a bit of a problem because she had ties to the Clinton Foundation. And it wasn't too long before Bill Clinton himself made a personal trip to Haiti and got her out of there, got her released from the prison and got her back to the United States. She later changed her last name and then promptly took a job working for the Amber Alert system, which is the organization in the United States that sends out a massive network-wide alert when a child has gone missing so that everyone in the area can help to find this missing child. Obviously, right when it happens, it's critical to act as fast as you can. And she took a job at the Amber Alert system. So a woman who was in jail for trafficking 33 allegedly orphaned Haitian children gets sprung by Bill Clinton and then takes a job with the organization that is in charge of tracking kids that get taken. And you just, when you hear that, you just take a couple steps back and you go, okay, what's going on here? What are we talking about here?
Sean Atwood's response to that is something I'll never get over, because he really was shocked to his socks by that information. Do we know Laura Silsby's name now?
Yeah, I don't know it off the top of my head, but her last name changed. But yeah, she's out there doing her thing still. And, that ties into some of the things that people in the United States come to learn. Very few people come to learn about this one particular topic, and that is talking about an organization called Child Protective Services. And that is an organization that makes sure that kids that are being mistreated in their home, this organization gets in the middle of it and maybe takes them out and puts them in foster care. And Child Protective Services has a very disturbing reputation as being involved in child trafficking. I'll tell you one thing: the investigators that have gone down that path, and I won't pretend to know the ins and outs of that, but the investigators that have gone down that path into Child Protective Services and their ties to child trafficking have wound up very much dead. It is not an organization that you investigate on a whim, and if you get involved in that, you better be prepared for some serious repercussions. Like I said, I don't know enough about it to put myself in any sort of danger, except that I know that people that have investigated that organization have found themselves in a lot of trouble. And of course, when you're dealing with kids, it's very emotional, and we understand that there's certain flaws with the system, and I think we allow for a certain amount of fuckery to be happening inside these organizations. But when you realize it's systematic and that a lot of this isn't accidental, it's not a couple people that are that aren't doing their job properly. In fact, it is a couple of people that are actually that are placed in these organizations specifically to facilitate some very unspeakable actions. And it's not limited to Child Protective Services. It happens in all sorts of these organizations inside the government. It's disheartening because once you realize this, then you start to just think, is everything compromised? Is everything rigged? Is everything a rich man's trick? Is that how it is? And unfortunately, and I'd love to be able to say, no, we've got it all figured out. It's not all bad. It's just some aspects. Well, unfortunately, I feel like it's infected just about every level: state, federal, local, courthouses, and police departments and judges and media and not everybody's involved in it, but they've got people at the right positions inside these organizations that can make things happen, or they can make investigations go away. And I think one of the nice things, if this is a way to describe the Epstein situation, which is, there's nothing nice about it, but there is one bright light that has come from this, and that is that I think people are now waking up to the realization that these things happen, that these sexual blackmail operations are in place, and that sometimes the police cut certain people deals because they're tied to intelligence. And then you start to see guys like Alexander Acosta get promoted up into a nice position as the Department Secretary of Labor. And you go, well, that's an interesting thing. That should be a guy that gets demoted, not promoted. And you go, okay, so now you're starting to figure this out. This is how it works. So if ever, obviously the Jeffrey Epstein situation was horrible for all the people involved, and it involved some shady individuals. But the bright side is that it did show the general public that these sorts of conspiratorial topics are not just left for people like me wearing tinfoil hats, but these are actual events that happen, and they happen quite a bit. And this is not something that people should be dismissive about. And it, like for me with 9/11, my take was, if this is a lie, then what else is a lie? And maybe the Jeffrey Epstein situation will do that to other people. They will realize, okay, if this is corrupt, then what else is corrupt?
Yeah. Just one thing to add there, just very quickly, Charlie, that you talk about, what they don't like people investigating. One of the journalists, Liz McKean, who was very prominent in trying to find out what was really going on with Jimmy Savile, and she later was, I'm not even sure if she narrated or was the prime journalist on the documentary that Channel 4 put out here, which was about the other really big child abuser at the time, the Liberal Member of Parliament, Cyril Smith. Right. And this huge man. Big, horrible, fat man. And as I say, Liz McKean, this journalist, she was very, very prominent. She worked with Marion Jones, I think it was, on the story from the very beginning. And that woman was only, I think, 49 or something when she started doing it. And this was the kind of area, the Child Protection Services that she was looking into, and she winds up dead. I mean, they said, it was a medical condition, but how convenient,
Yeah, unfortunately, this is what happens when you dig into these important events. And I would say that there's no two bigger events than the JFK assassination and 9/11. And if people are interested in those topics, and there's a lot of them, they've got to watch your movie. JFK to 9/11, everything is a rich man's trick. I don't even know how to quantify how many times it's been viewed, because I see it all over the internet on a variety of platforms, hundreds of thousands, hundreds and hundreds of now well into the millions of people.
Well, I was told that the real figure, Charlie, is way past a billion views. And the reason that I say that is because of Andy Young, who's a wonderful man. I hope Andy sees this. I'd like to give him a little wave if he's still interested. I know that from poor health he had to give up being doing Raconteurs News and being a broadcaster. But he's a Google Analytics expert. And when he first interviewed me, it was the first time, I think, or the second. I've talked to him several times, but when I went on the show, we talked about, just before we went on air, we talked about the hits, because I knew there was something wrong with the hits, because they were going up at 5,000 a night, every single night. I was counting them, and I thought there's something wrong there. And it would be just like, the people who protect Prince Andrew to be scaling it down by 10 times, 15 times, 20 times. At that stage, I just don't know. I was thinking to myself, could it be that the hits, which by then were around 50 million, and I know there'll be people who'll jump on me straight away and say, come on, the hits on your original were about 5 to 6 million when it disappeared. But there were so many copies by then. I was very grateful to Jason Goodman. And anybody who wants to know about this, please just watch that interview. He allowed me to go into this for quite a while because there were so many other copies, full-length copies, one by this man called Shane Seavey, who'd actually put 2 versions of it onto YouTube. And when you added up all of the hits from those ones and all the other ones, and then when you added up all of the hits from the people who'd stolen quarter of an hour here, 15 minutes there, there was even one man who put out the whole film in bite-sized chunks and sections and whatnot. When you added it all together, it was about 50 million hits-ish. And then Andy came along and he said, well, this is after the interview he did with me had been banned, where I tried to explain about about hierarchy and discrediting the earthly paradise, as Orwell put it. And he said, while we were live on air, just like this, he said, well, I'm a Google Analytics expert, and okay, I can't get it down to the last 1 or 2, but I can see by the graph what they've really been doing to you. And he said the fact is that they really raise their game whenever you're on. That was what he said to me. He said, we've had, manipulation of our own hits a lot already. That was why he was so primed to it. But he said, whenever you're on, they really raise their game. And I said, well, where do you think the true level is? And by how much do you think it's been underreported? And he said, I'm absolutely certain. He said, I can tell you for certain, Mr. Conolly, it is being underreported by 200 times. And that the true figure is way over 1 billion. And that was then.
Oh, my God.
That was then. And the thing is, Charlie, the government would deny it. If you could grab an MI6 spokesman, a CIA spokesman right now, they would obviously say that, that I'm talking nonsense. But the fact is that in this world, nothing but nothing is, as you Americans say, a better bottom line and a true indicator of something that's really going on than money. And at that period leading up to where my movie was banned, it was being used to advertise every bloody thing. Holidays, chocolates, Jaguar cars. The advertising agencies were making a fortune out of my movie, and I couldn't make any money out of it whatsoever. This ties up once again with what I've said about dirty men like Ephraim de Veroli and people who are merchants of death. If you're a man who wants to spread mayhem and poverty and subjugation throughout the world, they help you as much as they can. But if you're a man like me or a man like you who wants to spread the truth and reveal what's really going on, then they rig the world so that you can't get any funding, can't get any payment. To this day, I keep saying it, that maybe I wouldn't blame people for not believing me. But I really was paid nothing to make that movie, and I didn't have a budget. The wonderful man who worked with me to make that film, we had no money at all, and we weren't paid to do it. It was purely a labor of love. I wanted the world to know what really happened with Kennedy and with the truth of the Second World War and everything else at 9/11, because I felt it would shine a light into a room that's been kept dark forever. And was delighted to find that what actually happened was that when my movie became known and it went viral, it pretty much seemed like someone threw open a window and sunlight burst into this darkened room. The difference between now and then is so marked. And that's let me get into something I think is very important that I'd like to bring up. And that is the public comments on the Prince Andrew, Emily Maitlis interview. There's a few people I would like to thank, if you don't mind, and a few people. Is that okay?
Yeah, of course. Please go for it.
Well, it's just that when that interview first went out and it first started to really hit the world, and I'm sure it hit you pretty hard as well. I started to look at the public comments, and I thought, this is going to be interesting to see, because I'm sure there'll be a bit of humor here as well as, some good insights. And one of the very first things that I noticed was from a man called Pat Farrell. Pat, hello. Thank you for taking the trouble, because he did make something I feel which is noteworthy, which he said, I'm surprised the BBC didn't disable the comments. And I was very surprised that they didn't disable the comments. It's been very clear to me that they've been using it as a litmus test to really read where public opinion is at the moment. And what they got was, they say it's 20,000 comments and that it's been seen 2 billion times. I'll bet you it's been watched 200 million times minimum. And I'll bet you that there is probably 500,000 public comments. Because, again and again and again, you've got things like a man who calls himself Low Buster, whoever that is, hello. He says, he quotes something that Prince Andrew says, where he says, I don't remember ever going upstairs, and that photo was taken upstairs. Well, then how do you know what upstairs looks like? Aha, got you. And there was a one from a Mike Tombros where he's saying the way that Prince Andrew is behaving, he says, this is bordering on the dog ate my homework level. Which I really love that. I really love that. Another one who simply calls himself Rob R. He says, geez, what a train wreck. This cockroach couldn't lie straight in bed.
Yeah.
You get that. Another one says, this came from a Piper Nelson. She says, this is what every single pedophile says when they get caught. Mm. I think that's a very good comment. Then you get people like Brock Hittel saying, asking, why is there even a royal family in 2020? What do they do? It's ridiculous. We don't need them. And I was very grateful to someone called R. Sontag. Hello, R. Sontag, who says, how come the BBC interviewer never mentioned Jimmy Savile in his relationship with Prince Charles?
Ooh, that's a good one.
That is a good one. That's quite an omission, isn't it? Mm-hmm. I remember watching the whole thing and constantly thinking, well, come on, Emily. Where's the Jimmy Savile bit? Come on, you've got to talk about that. But she never did. I've got to go, do a few more of these. There's a man called Jack Green. He simply says Prince Andrew raped children and should be hung in the street. It's time we had a republic. And of course, this man, L.E. Olson, I think it is, says it's obvious that Andrew had Epstein killed to silence him for good. And that takes us straight to, a certain man called a comedian, Ricky Gervais, who said exactly the same thing at the Golden Globes. Mm. It's humor, of course, but you know how there's lots of true things said in jest, Charlie.
Yeah.
I think the whole world is grateful to Ricky Gervais for what he did that night. I couldn't get over it. I still can't. And if Ricky gets to see this, I'd just like him to know I've been trying to get in touch with him. I can't get in touch with him. You never can get in touch with people who are, multimillionaires and who are part of the mainstream media. I tried getting in touch with him through his girlfriend's agent, and there was no response. But
he's got my book.
He's got your book. How do you know?
I sent it to. He's in the book, so I sent it to his assistant. We were communicating via email. And when he did his Golden Globes, I posted out on my social media, now do you people understand why I had Ricky in my book? He's talking about the truth, and he's doing it in a way with the best way you can talk about the truth, with a big smile on your face and framed as a joke, and you get everybody laughing. There weren't a lot of people laughing in that room, but the rest of the world was very much on board with him. I'm a huge fan. I love what he's doing. I love the way he just goes after people with a smile on his face because he knows how to do it. He knows how to work an audience, and they always let the court jester live. You know, they don't murder the court jester.
That's a very true statement. I hope it turns out to be that way for Ricky. The thing is that again, one of the few things that I hope comes out of this is that I want Ricky Gervais to know, and I want everybody else in his position to know that. You know, I mean, you and I have corresponded, Charlie, and I've tried to say that, you know, I don't want to talk like this forever. I don't want, you know, David Icke and his son and other people to still have to be trying to do this in 10 years' time or in 20 years' time or whoever comes after. You know, we've got to win this for the sake of all the children who are being hurt, and we've got to win this for the sake of the planet, because the oligarchs are never going to solve these, you know, problems that we have with the environment. So, you know, it seems to me possible, at least thinkable, that the reason that Ricky was able to get away with what he did, without, I mean, it's funny, he actually asked one of the audience, you know, please don't have me rubbed. I think it might have been Martin Scorsese, wasn't it? You know, he actually said,
Joe
you know,
Pesci.
Well, you know, one of those gangster type people, you know, please don't have me, you know, send a hitman. I'm only joking, kind of thing. But, you know, until the day that someone like Ricky Gervais, who it seems isn't as controlled as much as the other whores in Hollywood, who clearly are part of the child pedophile network. Yeah. Who knows how many and who knows to what extent? Only they know. But from the silences that, you know, we've had and the lack of reaction that I've had from, you know, people like Richard Branson, Peter Gabriel, all the ones who are supposed to be the elite, the cream, etc., it's very plain that either they're involved or they have very close friends who've asked them, you know, please don't mention what I've really been up to with kids and underage girls and all that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And this is going to go on and on forever until somebody like Ricky Gervais, somebody who has mega money and has mega influence, supports my film and gets it out there to the rest of the world. It has had a huge impact in the English-speaking world. It has. But it's still not allowed in cinemas. It's being banned. The original people saw that coming. Very wise people saw that coming, and they uploaded pirate copies, many of them, and so you can still see it. Anybody who's out there, you know, who wants to see the whole thing, if this program has made them curious, if you look around, people like Patricia Negron have told me that there are quite a few copies that have that try to dissuade you and say, you know, you've got to sign in with your age and this is child protected and all the other guff that, you know, YouTube do to try and put you off seeing it. But it is still possible. There are still a few versions. You know, if you put in the full title, there are still a few complete versions, and you need a version that's 3.5 hours long. That's the proper length, the one that you've seen. I still believe that if someone was brave enough and tough enough to take my movie and put it out in American cinemas, I still think it would make a huge amount of money in American cinemas now, even though I think that it could be as many as 100 million Americans. I mean, it must be about that many have seen it, I think. Otherwise, we wouldn't have this billion hits thing, because Americans write to me all the time saying, Jesus, Mr. Conolly, this movie, this powerhouse documentary, I can't get over it. As you said in the introduction, it's changed my life. I've watched it 15 times because there's so much information there. I have to watch it over and over and over again to remember everything that's there. This is the kind of thing I get all the time. And it's ceaseless. It never stops coming. It never stops coming. So I still believe, honestly, that it could make a lot of money and be successful in American cinemas, in Canada. I still think it could do business in Britain. But until the day that I can give it to the French, the Germans, the Spanish, the Italians, everybody, the Arabs who've written to me, the Chinese who've written to me, there's an opportunity here. And it just shows you how the world really works. There's an opportunity here for someone, anybody who's a brave entrepreneur, who can help me to get this into foreign cinemas, could make billions if they want to. But it just shows you that it's not money that matters to the people at the top at all. It's power. And they know that if my movie was to get out there and it was to change Holland and Sweden and Finland and Germany and Austria and China and Japan as much. You see, they are now behind us in a sense. They don't know that everything is a rich man's trick. They don't know in the Far East and in Arabia, etc. They don't realize that all the news is fake news. If they did, there would be this homogeneity of thought all over the planet that would all be saying, oh, come on, we're being had every day by rich people. And that could lead to the revolution that this world needs. Otherwise, we're never going to deal with the environmental catastrophe that we're facing. I mean, the weather that we've seen here in Britain over the past year and a half has been appalling. Anybody will tell you. It's just been endlessly raining. I checked the statistics today, and Britain, for a good 2 years now, has been as wet as the wettest place on earth. There's a place in India that has the record rainfall. And we've been at that level now for a year and a half. It just won't stop raining. And why? Well, it seems to me to be pretty straightforward, the explanation. What else can it be when we've got this thing about polar bears drowning, other than the planet's warming up, the two ice caps are melting. The moisture's got to go somewhere. It goes into the atmosphere, it drops down on us. And that's why the winters for so long have been a lot milder, and that's why we're getting so much rain. It's a field of mud out there, wherever you go in Britain at the moment. I am really scared that we are pushing the world towards some kind of cliff edge that we can't even see. Maybe we only need a quarter of a degree or half a degree or something more generally around the world, and we'll all wake up one morning and find that the bed is floating down the street, and that the Eiffel Tower is underwater, and Big Ben is underwater, and all the skyscrapers in New York are only just peeking above the water, because we've got. That's what I honestly think that we're heading for that kind of catastrophe, and then it won't be until then that people wake up, and it'll be too late. I am delighted that we've got what so many people are saying in quotes is a woke culture now. That's why I wanted to read out some of those comments that on the Prince Andrew Emily Maitlis interview, because the ones that have given me the most hope are the ones that have said, and there's been so many, where people have just said, look, we know what this is all about because we're not asleep anymore. Mm-hmm. We've seen Mr. Connolly's film, and we know that this, what Prince Andrew is doing. We know that everything's a rich man's trick. Yep. We are now, in quotes, woke. that this is a woke culture. This will be scaring the living daylights out of the Queen and all of her rich friends. It will be scaring the living daylights out of the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers and the Kuhn-Loebs. All of the mega rich people around the world will be terrified of the fallout from the Prince Andrew interview. And they know that the fallout has mainly been because of the influence of my film and the fact that this public library that everybody is part of, that they don't even know when they're being influenced by their friends, and don't even know when a seed crystal is entering their thoughts. They don't even know. But it's a shared thing now right across the Western world that people on different versions of my movie often start, and they start on other movies. I found a movie just the other day. I think it was actually one of Sean Atwood's interviews. And the first comment was, everything's a rich man's trick. It's being shared everywhere. So, the seed crystal is there, but the revolution that this world needs to save it will not begin until somebody like Ricky Gervais comes along and has the courage to say, well, okay, I've got 50 million, I've got 100 million, whatever. I'm going to take Mr. Conolly's film and I'm going to distribute it in Europe. And, I don't see the next big change happening until something like that comes off.
Well, there is no expiration date for the truth. And this movie is filled.
What a wonderful saying.
Filled with the truth. Thank you so much, Francis Richard Conolly, the director, the creator, the writer of one of the best documentary movies I've ever seen. Thank you so much for spending time with us. We really do appreciate it.
You're a gentleman, Charlie. Thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.